How would you design a beautiful, exquisite language selector? You might be working in a corporation which wants to support citizens living all around the world, so different languages in different countries right there. Or you might be living in a country where you or your users rather, are used to multiple languages that need to be all available on your site, and they need to have a choice, right, to select one or the other. Now, well, what's a big deal? We just have a couple of drop downs and we just have a couple of icons and we call it a day, right? Turns out to be quite complicated at times. So normally, indeed, this is going to be a very common pattern. We go ahead, we pick all the countries we support, we add some flags, we mark maybe the current selection as well, we order them, maybe group them, right? We order them and off you go, right? In fact, grouping might be a good idea, but it's also quite difficult, right? So when we start grouping, sometimes you will end up in situations where you have to repeat multiple countries twice, right? So maybe Canada English and Canada Francais, right? But at the same time, you also have sometimes countries which are kind of just difficult to order. Like, for example, if you look in Europe, like Turkey, is it part of Europe? Or, where should people actually be looking for it, right? So in fact, Turkey here appears in Middle East and North Africa, but sometimes it does appear in Europe, right? So there are plenty of little fine details that actually make this quite difficult. So let's dive into a little bit more detail, right? And for that, we need to understand that we are dealing with language selectors most of the time when we're dealing, of course, with a multilingual design. So our assets, our designs, our visuals will need to be adjusted based on the country that we want to support, based on the language that we want to support, right, as well. If you happen to be running an e-commerce site, you might want to allow people to select multiple currencies. If you're dealing with something that's very visual, you probably will need to adjust way more than languages. Probably avatars, probably images, maybe background images, maybe color scheme, maybe typography altogether. So it's kind of language selectors is just a little part of a very, very big story. But we're probably going to have them when it comes to public services, corporations, hospitality industry, all of those things which kind of probably going to attract a lot of people from many different regions or countries. Where do they usually live? Well, it's not very surprising. They usually live in the header or in the footer, and indeed often presented with flags. But very often you end up with a lot of tiny problems that actually make the experience of selecting a country or selecting a language difficult. So here's one of them. We land on lululemon.com, and in here we have a selection of countries, and they are grouped indeed. And so we've picked Belgium with euros, right? And here it goes. Where are we? We are on the website shipping to the United Kingdom. That's a little bit unusual. I would say, why United Kingdom? I just picked Belgium, didn't I? Right? And then, of course, as you proceed here, what you see in the right upper corner is Austria selected, with Belgium available there as well, and with two options available as well for the language selection, right? Namely, Deutsch and Francais. English is the default at this point, right? Right, but when we hover, or rather click maybe, on Austria at this point, we don't see Austria in the overview, right? Because it's already selected. But actually, I did select Belgium, right? So a little bit confusing, maybe. And of course, then when you click and select Belgium twice, well, the second time, then it kind of works. We need to be very careful, kind of really misleading people in this way. On the other hand, if you go to Arden, seems like a very beautiful website, but they decided to pick something slightly different. Rather than flags, they're using food, they're using kind of common destination areas, landmarks, right, in there to indicate different countries. Not certain that it's going to help people find what they are looking for faster. And another issue is as well, right, as you start typing on the keyboard, because this is basically kind of a selection that could be expecting a keyboard behavior as well. This is where it's getting a little bit difficult too, because you're typing you, but then where are you supposed to be brought, and in which language, right? In which language are those languages going to be represented? So if you happen to be from Germany, should it be German or should it be Deutsch, right? So that's again all the little conversations that we need to have. So let's break it down step by step, and let's start with something that I'm sure all of us know for sure because we had this experience before. Redirects can be very, very expensive, meaning they can bring people to places where they cannot get away from. And that also means that this is going to probably cause a huge bounce rates, huge abandonment, and that's probably not something that we want. Now, very often when it comes to auto redirects from, you go to the .com website and you get redirected to .de website, it's usually based on IP, what's the user's location, or it's based on browser's locale, right, when it comes to the language. But Either way, we cannot confidently infer users' preferences without actually asking them explicitly first, right? For example, if a user happens to be connecting to an American website from Germany, right, we can nudge them towards the German website, having maybe showing sort of a little window, little pop-up maybe, or just a message on the top, right? But if they connect to a German website with the American local or English, US English locale preferred in the browser, we probably shouldn't, right? So if I had to choose between the two, what to base auto-redirects on, right, then I'm probably going to do that based on the location, but not based on the language. It's very common that somebody might be connecting from Germany, but might prefer an English version of the site, right? So in general, redirects based on locations seems to be a little bit more reliable, right? But they are error prone too, right? So you always need to allow users to override redirects still. So here's an example why. So if we go to Audi.com, right, we get redirected to the German version of the site, right? We do have a selection of it, right? But it's in German. So if I happen to be in Germany and I want to explore Audi.com, I have to know German to navigate to be able to find my country or look it up, of course, right? So I cannot go ahead and kind of make a selection based on my input, right? I can, of course, search and assume and hope that what I'm typing here will be understood, right? But it's not necessarily the case. And then, of course, you have another situations because here I landed up on a Lithuanian website and I cannot go back anymore, right? There is no way for me to change the language, and I probably will not be able to find it even if I actually could, understand some parts of Lithuanian, just because, I don't see any icons, I don't see any selectors, I don't see anything there at all, right? Here's another example from BMW, right? Where BMW does it differently. It doesn't redirect automatically, but instead it prompts you to choose BMW in your country. Now, for some reason, on some pages, the selector doesn't really work, but once it does, here we go. You can choose a country from that list, and it's all in English here because we also happen to be on an English website, I guess. And then you have BMW in your country, which tries to track your IP, or user's location rather, in order to show their website in the language that they will understand. But, very much like in the previous example, there is no way to go back now, right? If I wanted to change that, I cannot see anywhere any button to do that, right? This is just not possible, right? Okay, well, what else can we do then? Well, first of all, if we avoid auto redirects, right, what we can do is just give people options. So here, when you go to Dyson, right, we have a couple of options right here. First, we have a little prompt on the top, which says that, okay, we've selected now Dutch language from Belgium, but we're going to show the list prioritized based on the location. So in fact, I have picked manually previously Belgium, Netherlands, but I'm connecting now from Germany. So here we go. Based on the location, we can suggest or nudge people towards German website, German version, but not necessarily automatically directing there. And there is also the option to switch to Belgian and French, and then also pick another region. And as we go and we pick another region, here we go, the options all grouped and also with flags at this point, but they are a little bit different compared to the previous examples, right? Because now we have all these tags here, right, in local language, right? This is probably going to make it a bit easier for people who speak only those languages to find their language, right? But sometimes you can also do it a little bit differently too. IKEA is a beautiful example. They probably have the largest language selector in the world, right? And it's kind of autocomplete / search. So you can type in endonyms, you can type in domain endings, you can type in languages, right? And kind of drives you toward that particular website. It's kind of a pre-selector almost for the language, right? For the website, rather. But once you've selected it, right, there is no way to go back unless you want to choose, again, change the website. So you're changing the website, but there is a very strong assumption that the country of the website, right, like let's say ikea.de, is going to be displayed in German. There is no way to turn it to English, right? If you choose a Swedish website, it is going to be displayed in Swedish. You cannot choose only language or you cannot choose only country. They're kind of coupled. You cannot decouple them. So you cannot really choose one or the other. You have to choose both at the same time. But it doesn't really account for some of the situations that might happen. You are visiting, you may be using a Ukrainian VPN, right? So you're kind of officially visiting from Ukraine, but you're not located in Ukraine, right? So, or you're visiting Lithuania for a few days, but you don't speak Lithuania. It probably doesn't make sense to show the website in Lithuanian and redirect people to Lithuanian website all the time. Or maybe you live in Estonia, but you want to change the currency because you want to pay with company's credit card, and the company is located in the US, so it would be, preferably you'd be paying in the US dollars, right? But just because you live in Estonia, you can't because you're going to be redirected, right? And then maybe you want to buy a gift for an American friend, so you go to an American website, but you get redirected to a Polish website because you're now connecting from Poland, right? And you cannot change that sometimes. Or, plenty of situations like this where you connect from the US, but you need to provide a VAT number because your company is from Europe, but it's not visible because you're connecting from the US, right? So we really need to fix it by decoupling location and language and many other things, like, for example, currency, right? Because we shouldn't be assuming that a location always kind of defines the selection of language and currency, right? It will be probably fine in many cases, but will probably break the experience altogether for some users. So if you go to Adidas for a very long time, essentially when you want to buy, let's say, from Germany and have something delivered to Poland, you have two options. You either go to the German website and order with shipping to Germany only, or you go to the Polish website, which is only in Polish, and then order to a Polish address, which means that you have to play with Google Translate or things like that to be able to do that, right? But ideally, I would love to be able to go to a website, let's say the Polish website, change the language to English, and then be able to pay with a delivery option for Poland, right? I couldn't do this for a very long time. So this is what you get instead. You just select the shipping location, but it kind of assumes that one is very tightly coupled with the other, like the language and the location, right? But here's another example where it's done very differently, right? Where it's kind of very similar design, really, but you can choose multiple things. So you actually choose the location, and then separately from that, you choose the language. You save, and that's it, and you're done, right? Here's another example on Monis, kind of the same story, where you have a language, and you have a country, and they are separated, right? So you can choose the language first, and then you can choose the country, or the other way around, right? So that's a bit better. And then, of course, you get this, which is a little bit more than just language and country. Because what if you could also change the currency? So I want to ship to Germany, I want to language English, and I want to see currency in, let's say, dollars. Why shouldn't it be possible? And at the same time, you can also update the payment methods so somebody will know what exactly they're going to pay, right? And what options are supported. And it's a really, really powerful thing, because what you can do just by doing that is remarkable. You could basically change the product pricing on every single product page, showing people final prices in the currency that they will understand, right? Which I think is actually really, really neat, right? Very powerful indeed. Airbnb, similar story, right? Where you have multiple places where languages and currency are broken down, kind of separate, right? And you can select the language and region, and you can select the currency, and it all happens separately. And everything is displayed in a local language, right? So if you happen to be speaking Thai, this is going to be the interface right there. You still get to see the global icon and also the euros as a pricing, right? And so at the same time, what you can see on the top, at the very top, this little toggle here, it's auto-translate. So you can say, I would like to see it in that language, right? And to automatically translate descriptions and reviews to my favorite language, maybe to English, or maybe to Thai, or maybe to something else, right? Very cool, very, very powerful here too. Here's another one from iherb.com, which goes a little bit further even. What you get here is literally a selection of features, kind of more like customization of settings. So you can say, okay, I'm connecting from Uruguay, or I want to ship to Uruguay. The language I prefer is Spanish, the currency I prefer is dollars, and this is the metrics, units, right? So I can select pounds or I can select kilograms. So it's just selecting and choosing and maybe changing the shipping location, right? Right, here we go. I'm just typing one or the other, and you go to, let's say, United States. You can actually get zip code. You can also select your language, Spanish. You can also select your currency. And you can also select specifically what units of measure would you prefer, right? Meters, imperial, and so on and so forth. And then based on that, they also show on the top different payment methods that you have and available shipping methods as well, right? And you can even pick one, and then this is going to be used as a default to display all prices in the shop as your final prices, right? This is probably going to boost your conversion as well, right? Here's another example of something that's a little bit further than just language and country, where here, when you're going to SPDR here, you actually, the system tries to infer where you're selecting from, coming from. It says, okay, you are visiting from Germany, and your role is institutional investor, and you also have 2 options for language, right? So you can choose a location or adjust the location. You can adjust your role, right? And you can also select a site that you prefer to see. Excellent. In general, I would say that when it comes to language selector, any kind of adjustments of that kind, we want to be able to adjust the shipping location, preferred currency, units of measure, time, date, formatting, time zones, preferences, level of expertise or level of experience, also potentially things like VAT and taxes, supported payment methods, and the sky is the limit, right? So that could be very, very useful to really customize the experience so everybody coming from any part of the world feels like home, right? Okay, what else can we do? Well, in terms of layout, you know me already at this point. I'm not a big fan of modals at all. Modal windows are often distinctively dismissed. So before somebody even realizes that there is a choice, they just dismiss it altogether. Mostly because modal windows just block the UI. Instead, what can we do instead? Maybe show a floating non-modal dialog or non-modal window instead, and maybe even make it collapsible. Let's take a look at some examples. Modals. Probably going to work, right? But maybe at this time, at this point, somebody is really just bothered with somebody else, just something else, just wants to browse, right? Maybe not this. Another option would be, of course, to kind of show something like a prompt like this on tap, on click, right? Like it's done on booking.com, very similar pattern that what we saw on Airbnb as well, right? But here you basically have the selection of the language you have suggested for you based on your previous past browser locale's history and the preferences we get in the browser. And you actually get the same for country as well. So you get this for country, and you get this also for the currency. Good stuff, right? But again, while we're operating this selection, we cannot do anything else on the website. We cannot scroll, we cannot tap, we cannot click, we cannot copy paste, right? So that's all out of question. Well, that's a pretty big model, you would say. So of course you can also group it a little bit better, maybe, and just show a slightly smaller model where you have a drop-down, and then another drop-down, and then another drop-down. We saw this already before. But I would argue that maybe one thing I would challenge you to test is, how would this work? So instead of having a modal window, you basically end up with a non-modal window, where you do have the selection, but you can still scroll down, right? You can dismiss, maybe you could even collapse, and then you can submit the preferences, right? Kind of overriding Patagonia's preferences that it inferred from your location, or from your browser and from your location. And then you also get 2 options, actually 3 options to choose the language, right? In here, right, when you kind of get to the navigation, and also all the way in the footer as well, right? So you kind of get access to the selection all the time, but it's never really blocking the UI. It's kind of covering the UI, of course, right? But it's not always in the way, which I think is actually pretty cool. Here's another example of what we could do. Maybe kind of place it on the right bottom corner, just because usually because of F pattern, people tend to read on the left. So we're not blocking the view, but it's there, right? Being available. Great stuff. On the other hand, we can do more than this, right? Because we do have some options for grouping, but we also can take it make it even more compact. Because we could use something like a click-through menus that we saw from a mega drop-down as well. So while very often all country and language options are presented on a separate page, often grouped per region, this does create some problems, like what do we do with Turkey, for example, right? We can also use tabs and accordions to group them. We need to be just really, really careful about how to do that, right? So we have Revolut, and they actually highlight both coming soon options, right, and available options as Americas, Asia Pacifics, and so on. A very, very common pattern indeed, right? Here's a little bit different, where it's still kind of this covering the entire page. We can change the location, but then here you've got not only just kind of the location, right, but you also get differences in languages. So here we go. We have Hong Kong, and we have it in Cantonese, and we also have it in English, right? So you kind of choose your own journey here. And then you go to Switzerland, and you get it in 4 languages right here as well. Okay. Sometimes you see this grouping. Should it matter where it's shipped to, if it's European Union, because the prices are probably going to be the same and it's going to be euro anyway, right? Well, sometimes you will get this, right? But sometimes you get a slightly different option, like for example, tabs, right? So here on Dell.com, we have all the different tabs and everything else is just the list in alphabetical order, right? Okay, and then of course we get to Cisco, which is kind of using this tabs, right, in order to be able to jump between the different regions, right? And let's say you choose one option or you choose another, right? It kind of indicates in, next to the globe, what is the language and what is the location, right? It might not be as obvious, right? But actually it's quite compact compared to this big overlay that takes up the entire screen. And another option that you can also find on eDreams is just accordions, actually vertical accordions, right? Where again you have the flags, you have the currency, and you also have all the languages just basically grouped. Plus they also get rest of the world as well here, so that might be kind of a way out in some situations too. Neat example on Oracle in the footer, where you kind of get this click-through menu that we again see in some mega drop-downs, right? But of course, if it's kind of a very big list, maybe we need 2-3 columns for that, right? What it would look like on mobile, I'm glad that you asked, because this is pretty much the same. You just get to this accordions and you're just listing everything and you open one accordion and you close the other, right? Pretty straightforward here. What else can we do? Autocomplete. Autocomplete is great if it works, right? Because we definitely need to support a lot of stuff for it to work. We need to support frequent abbreviations, endonyms, shorthands in different languages, by the way. And each suggestion could display both language and country. So this could look like this, right? When you can select country or region. And as you just focus on the field, we need to display maybe the most frequent options, right? And then based on that, we could prefer and let people select multiple languages in the same way as well, right? It could also look like this maybe. What happens if you don't find your country, right? So this is just a mock-up I created. What if you're typing L, right? And Lithuania is in the list, right? So somebody from Lithuania might find it and you can say soon, but there are 4 locations nearby because there are plenty of options in, Lithuania is a relatively small country. There are plenty of options around Lithuania where you can find us as well, right? Here's an example from TransferWise Now Buys, right, where you can also select a default language with autocomplete. And then as you type English, they also distinguish between English UK, English US, and so on. Here's another one where you can select the market region you type in UK. And again, you have options, Great Britain, Ukraine, South Korea, and then the rest is all kind of grouped, all alphabetically listed, right? But talking about flags, we have to be very careful because flags are not languages. Well, flags are specific to countries, but languages often cross borders. So if you target users from a specific country, then flags are fine. But if you're targeting users of specific languages, they are not, right? So when we're looking back to the booking.com example, right? So if we have something like this for a language selector, where we have maybe, let's say, a flag, and then you have maybe language in English, and then you have Deutsch, which is a German in German, and then you have a drop-down for the language selector. Is this how it should be? Is it reasonable to do it this way? And also when you look back at booking, every time you hover over that language selector, you're actually getting a hint about what is it that you're going to do. But what language should it be in? Right? Should it be saying choose your language in English? Should it be saying wählen Sie Ihre Sprache in German? Or should it be saying something else in Mandarin, right? So how should that be? Now personally, I would say we probably want to give that tooltip a most universal kind of writing as possible, right? So that would be English, I guess, or we just avoid it altogether, right? Because maybe this tooltip is not necessary because we're indicating anyway that this is a drop-down, and that's probably what people are expecting to do, because we have a flag here anyway, right? So, not sure about this either, but I'm pretty sure about this, right? Where we actually get to see, again, when we're speaking about languages, right, difficult because Deutsch could also be spoken in Austria, could also be spoken in Switzerland. So is that the right way of kind of connecting it? Because we have not a location selection here, but a language selection, right? So this is where it kind of gets a little bit tricky. But definitely when we're speaking about the options, each of these options should be indicated in the native local language. We'll speak about it in just a moment, one more, right? But one thing that is often forgotten is that it's probably not going to be enough to just show this kind of drop-down, right? Well, because very often it might be cut off in just the wrong way, so people might not even know that there's a way to scroll down to see more options. So this is why it's usually a good idea to maybe hard code in some way, if it's possible, this kind of scroll bar, because it disappears on iOS devices, right? And see what we can do with that. And again, just as a quick reminder, whenever somebody starts typing or just hits or focuses on the input field, we probably want to show frequently used or most popular areas or countries. And also the same countries should also appear in the alphabetical list as well, with some items just cropped. So it's actually a bit more obvious that once you start scrolling down, you will be seeing more options, right? So this is what Booking.com does, right? And actually, in fact, whenever we're going from one language to another, it kind of gets highlighted here, as you can see for Deutsch in here, right? Okay, I have this kind of personal profiling for language selector with all the things that I shouldn't be forgetting when we're designing one. And that means that when it comes to language selector, it will appear in the right upper corner, it will appear in the footer as well, right? Maybe drop-down menu, but not the kind of select menu, but more rather than a sort of a native, custom drop-down design. We could be using flags for country-specific input, but not for language-specific input. We would be using sort of autocorrection if we're using autocomplete, right? And then when it comes to manual input and selection as well, we should be kind of just having a discussion. What happens if somebody is typing in something that's not available as a separate country? It's kind of more of a political decision, right? Do we then nudge them towards one of the countries that is accepted? Or do we accept their input? That's again something that you need to discuss with your team, right? But we probably want to group some popular options and surface them all the way on the top, right? And we probably want to have sort of kind of commonly used languages or commonly used options on the top as well, along with all languages, right? So this grouping could be, plenty of different groups and according to regions or according to languages that you want to support. And commonly used is just something that, most of your users will be doing, will be picking, and then all languages is basically everything that you have, right? And it keeps going. And here I would say, when it comes to actual design, if you have just a few options, maybe it could be sort of a drop-down or even a toggle, maybe, right? Where you can just click on one link or the other. If you have more than that, well, then we would go into autocomplete route, right? And if it's even more than that, maybe it should be a modal, well, actually a non-modal, right? Which would be appearing floating at the right bottom corner or left bottom corner. Or it would be a separate page, of course, as well. If in doubt, we would sort alphabetically. Well, we should be kind of having this discussion whether we want to detect IP and then kind of based on location, drive people towards one direction or the other, right? Whenever somebody focuses on the drop-down, we show options on focus. We accept abbreviations, so that means anything from EN to ENG to .co.uk to .uk to, GB, right? All these options have to be accepted, right? And then, of course, whenever somebody has chosen one of the languages, well, this change is going to have a dramatic impact on UI based on whatever you want to change in the UI, depending again on what the nature of your website is. So there is a wonderful, wonderful website that's covering all of that and way more, which is called Flags Are Not Languages, which I highly recommend you to look into with a couple of case studies and a couple of really good ideas to consider. So definitely a good option to keep in mind, right? Now, again, flags great for actual countries, but not so great for languages, right? But then what do we then use if we want to indicate actually the country selection? Well, one thing that we could do, of course, is use some sort of a globe icon and translation icon, right? That would be one of the options. In fact, when you start looking around, you'll find that there are plenty of websites doing just that. But we do have this sort of, internationalization globe kind of icon, but then here it's used to choose language, right? As it also should be, right? That makes perfect sense, right? But on the other hand, here, if you go to Atlassian, kind of get this, where you also have autocomplete, and you also get this kind of globe selector right here, right? As it should be, right? So no flags in use here either, and no flags in use here on Monday.com either, right? That seems to be kind of becoming an established rule when it comes to languages. In fact, however, one thing to keep in mind, of course, here, when we're dealing with all of these languages, the way of how to describe them would probably be not in English, not in German, not in any other popular language, but rather use the name of the language in its local format, rather than offering a choice in German or Chinese, label them appropriately. As James Offer says again on Flags Are Not Languages, right? Okay, well, one more thing that we need to keep in mind, of course, and that's quite significant, is that very often when people come to your website, and it might be available in a language that they don't really understand well, and their preferred language is not available yet. So what happens then, of course, is they're using sort of auto-translation services, maybe Google Auto-Translate. Now the problem is, of course, translation, automatic translation like that has its problems on its own, but there are also issues that that will happen when you have any sort of shorthands for languages. So if you're using, let's say, N for English or DE for German or things like that, what happens is whenever you end up on a page like this and it's getting translated, right, obviously this is going to be translated as well, right? And so you might be translating from French into English and you end up with this, which is not necessarily what you would be expecting when you actually want to select a language. So it kind of really ruins your experience because you don't even know what is what, right? How do we fix it? Well, every time you actually define or describe a language, describe it as its full name. So English rather than N, right? Because it will be translated wrongly, right? And sometimes it really brings some unusual side effects, I would say. So on Wise, when I'm translating from Turkish to English, right, it still shows me N here, right? But it shows me German here, right? Although I'm translating from Turkish to English, right? So this is right, but this doesn't seem to be, right? So why is it kind of just hanging around here? The reason for it is because I'm connecting from a German IP, so it's kind of trying to nudge me towards the German version, right? This way. But in fact, I actually wanted to see it in English, right? So this is why English is over here. So we kind of get a little bit of confusion over here, right there, right? How would it do it differently? Maybe would be indicating or explaining why this one is kind of highlighted this way in the first place. So it might be then easier to understand, right? All right, so with all of this in mind, these are all the things we need to kind of note when we're designing a language selector. We want to nudge users. So if somebody is actually going or coming from a German IP, but they're coming to an American website, maybe we want to show them that there is an option to go to a German website without automatically redirecting them. This should be their choice. So instead of having auto-redirect, we'll let them select where they want to go. We decouple presets, right? Instead of actually assuming that a language and country and currency are all tightly kind of connected in one way or the other, we don't make any assumptions at all. We allow people based on location, select the language and select the currency that they prefer, but they should be able, the users of course, should be able to override our custom selection. So they should be able to actually dedicate or select really location, language, and pretty much anything else that they might want to customize on their own. Right? And that can go really quite far, as we saw with sometimes even unit of metrics, right? It could be shipping options, things like that, anything that would drive them towards a better experience. Again, not to forget that once we know enough about the user, we can really customize the experience in a way that the prices for every product in the shop are going to be final prices with all the fine details about the shipping, delivery time, and things like that. That's very, very valuable. When it comes to showing the country option for users, yes, it could be a modal dialog, but it could also be a non-modal that's just floating and maybe is even collapsible. Probably the user should be able to open it both in the header and also in the footer, right? So they can dismiss it, but they should always be able to go back. And we can also, of course, try to organize countries and languages in tabs or accordions. Maybe even better would be to use autocomplete if you can provide support for endonyms and shorthands and kind of all the different abbreviations as well in different most popular languages, right? When it comes to flags, well, we do use flags for countries, but we do not use flags for languages. For languages, instead, we're using the globe icon, translate icon, and the void flags in there, right? And as we are listing all the languages, we'll label them locally, for example, Deutsch instead of German, so people who are speaking German better will actually find it and understand it faster than if it was just German, right? Avoid language shorthands or initials. Well, when we look into language selector, it seems a little bit daunting at first, but once we know a few rules here and there, we're probably going to design a pretty decent one. The most important thing about all of this, though, is that users need to have choice. We cannot infer what users' intent is based on their browser locale or based on their location. There are many, many different scenarios, be it VPN, be it there's somebody who wants to just buy gifts and deliver somebody to the US, right? There are plenty of situations that we could not even predict, right? So this is why it's absolutely critical that we always allow users to override our custom preferences or override our kind of settings, right? They should be able to decide on their own what they want to see on the site. And that's really the matter of choice, right? And once we have that, right, now once the users know that they can actually do whatever they want and twist the interface in any way that they need, if they need to, right, we can create an exquisite, beautiful, and amazing language selector that will be useful and that will be used by customers all around the world. And that's worth it.